The first case dates to about 25 years ago, when Prevost led the Augustinian province of Chicago. A priest who church leaders found had sexually abused minors was allowed to stay at an Augustinian monastery because he is an Augustinian. And what did Mr. Prevost say in his acceptance speech when he was declared to be the Pope? He said, "I am a son of St. Augustine." This is what he said. Why? Because he's an Augustinian. And he led the Augustinian order in Chicago. And under his watch, a priest who was a confirmed pedophile, was allowed to stay. In fact, it gets worse than this. In the early 2000s, while serving as the prior provincial of the Augustinian Order's province of Our Mother of Good Counsel in Chicago, the newly elected pontiff permitted Father James Ray. Now check this out. The newly elected pontiff, so Mr. Prevost himself, allowed Father James Ray, a priest suspended from public ministry due to serious accusations of child sexual abuse, to reside at St. John's Stone Friary in Hyde Park. The friary is closest to St. Thomas the Apostle Catholic Church and So he allowed the predator to live not only in an Augustinian home, because he was the head of the Augustinian order in Chicago, but the home that he allowed him to live in was smack right next to an elementary school. So you give a pedophile a house next to an elementary school. It's like, oh my God, dude. And it says here that Mr. Prevost allowed for this pedophile, Father James Ray, to have a house that belonged to the Augustinian order, which Mr. Prevost, who was now Pope Leo XIV, was running, was the head of. He was the head of the Augustinian order in Chicago. The Vatican denied Prevost ever authorized that arrangement. That doesn't mean a damn thing, because the Vatican has been covering up for these types for decades. And I don't know, Turkey said that the Armenian genocide didn't happen. Japan says that the rape of Nanking never happened. Are we to believe them? More recently, questions were raised about Prevost's knowledge of abuse allegations in the Chiclayo diocese. Chiclayo diocese is in Peru, where Mr. Prevost was a priest for, I want to say, 20 years. During his tenure as bishop, 2 priests were accused of molesting 3 young girls. And a complaint this year by Survivors Network of those abused by priests alleged that Prevost failed to open an investigation and sent inadequate information to Rome. So these 2 priests in Peru molested 3 girls. And not only did Mr. Prevost fail to commence an investigation, but he went so far as to send inadequate information to Rome. So he was covering up for it. And so there was a professor that this Washington Post article quotes. And look what this professor said. This is very telling. This professor says that covering up for pedophiles was so common that it is not surprising that the now current Pope was doing the same thing. He was covering up for pedophiles in the past. And it says here that given what we know about the pervasiveness of clerical sexual abuse, it is certainly plausible that abuse occurred on his watch. He was superior general of a congregation of priests that ministers in 50 countries across the globe. It's also entirely conceivable that he failed to act decisively in punishing perpetrators and supporting victims, but sadly, that's true of almost all the men who occupied positions of high leadership in the Catholic Church in the second half of the 20th century. You see what this Professor Cummings said? She said, this is the case. So it's not just Prevost, it's not just Francis, it's not just whatever, Benedict, John Paul II. She says here that this is the case of almost all the men who occupied positions of high leadership in the Catholic Church in the second half of the 20th century. What's the case? The case of covering up for pedophiles. They've all done it. It's a rite of passage. It's custom to cover up for pedophiles. The cardinal electors would be hard-pressed to find a man among their numbers whose record on this issue is spotless. Hard-pressed. And you're telling me that this church is of God, when it is hard-pressed for someone to find a cardinal elector who has not covered up for child molesters and predators. That's very telling, to say the least. That's very revealing. What did I say when I talked about who was going to become the next pope? I said it doesn't matter. And this was the title of the video that I did not too long ago. A couple of weeks ago, I uploaded this video. And the title of the video was what? It doesn't matter who's going to become the pope. And I said it doesn't matter if it's a right-wing pope or if it's a liberal pope. It doesn't matter. Because this pope is going to be evil. Whoever becomes the pope is going to be evil. Because the Vatican is evil. Plain and simple. A bad tree is going to produce rotten fruit. And I said, and I was very specific, I said, whoever becomes the pope will be someone who has covered up for pedophiles. And this is what I said. I said, whoever becomes the pope, I said, you're going to find out that he has covered up for pedophiles. Washington Post comes out with this article yesterday. In Rome, his role in 2 different cases of sexual abuse by priests in Chicago and Peru ultimately did not derail his candidacy. Oh, why am I not surprised? Why am I not surprised? You know why? Because it is so common that the Vatican has done this. It has been so common for the Vatican to cover up for pedophiles, for predator priests. It's almost like a rite of passage. It's almost, you could say that it is effectively customary to cover up for pedophiles in the Vatican. Oh my God. It's like the Vatican doesn't give a shit. It just doesn't give a shit. It's just like, okay, we got 1 billion Catholics. We got all these numbers. It doesn't matter the evils that we have done. Doesn't matter if our Pope covered up for a pedophile. Who cares? Because they all know that the people are going to revere him anyway, so they don't give a shit. It's crazy how much they don't care. It is so insane. Because they think, oh, well, we have the whole Latin American world, and most of the Catholic world is... The majority of the Catholic world can be broken up into, what? Latin America, the Spanish-speaking world. Let's just say the Spanish-speaking world, the Philippines, and some parts of southern Italy, so southern Europe, so Italy, Spain, Portugal. One country in the Balkans, Croatia, and a substantial part of the American population. And plus you have millions of Catholics who live in China, South Korea, Japan. But the majority of the Catholic world can be broken up into Latin America, the Philippines, and a substantial portion of the American population. That's the majority of the Catholic world. So I think in their minds, they're thinking, okay, we got all these numbers, and the Filipinos don't give a shit, because the Philippines is a corrupt society anyway. They're filled with Sodom. They're one of the most pro-Sodom countries on earth. And the Latin Americans don't give a shit, because the Latin Americans have embraced Sodom more so than most of the world has. They're very pro-Sodom, especially when you go to Mexico. Very pro-Sodom. It's scary how pro-Sodom the Latin American world has become. So they don't give a damn. They don't care. It's insulting. It is insulting. You are basically saying that the Catholic world is so stupid that we're just going to elect someone who covered up for a child molester. I mean, is this not what Mel Gibson should become the Pope, by the way. But he's too righteous to become the Pope. They'll never let him become the Pope. He's too good. He makes great movies. This is exactly what Mel Gibson was talking about. He was on the Joe Rogan show some months ago, and what did he say? He talked about some priest in Ohio. Remember that? He was talking about an Ohio priest who molested hundreds of children in a school for disabled kids. It was for the deaf and the mute, and he molested hundreds of those kids. And who was it that covered up for him? Oh, it was Mr. Ratzinger. Mr. Ratzinger didn't give a shit. Pope Benedict didn't give a shit. And they covered up for this guy for years. Oh, and when it was revealed that he was a pedophile, they sent him to a Catholic rehabilitation center. Oh, that's what they do. This is part of the policy in the Vatican world. They send you to a rehabilitation center. They don't send you to law enforcement. They don't send you to the police. They don't send you to justice. No, 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 no. They send you to a rehab center. And then they say, oh, he has been rehabilitated and he has made his peace with God. And through much prayer and consolation and fasting and silence and meditation and through much reflection, he has been healed of whatever, of his evil. He's great. He's fine. So let me just look this guy's name up. We're going to go back to this real quick. The Pope is just a corrupt politician who covers up for the system that he represents. He's a cover. The Pope is not in power, by the way. I refuse to believe that this man has any serious power. I refuse to believe that this guy has any sort of real authority. I think all these popes, I'm not saying all the popes in history were in this predicament. At one point in time, the popes were dictators. But I think now, in our own time, right, within recent decades, the popes have just been figureheads for a system, for the Vatican system. And so in the world of the Vatican, the Pope is there to be a face for this system. That's it. And when you look at a guy like this guy, Benedict, I mean, look at this photo. Look at this photo. I mean, it looks like something out of a horror movie. And Benedict did look evil. He did. He had the look of a very evil person. And we're supposed to embrace this guy like he's some holy man, and we're supposed to pretend that this Vatican institution has not been covering up for pedophiles for decades, and that it's not an evil institution. Pope failed to discipline U.S. priests who abused deaf children. Pope declined to defrock Father Lawrence Murphy while head of church's doctrinal enforcement institutions, U.S. newspapers claim. And this guy was the Pope at one point. This is Benedict. And he was doing this shit. It's almost like, listen, you could say, without being far-fetched or adventuresome, that it is a rite of passage in the College of Cardinals, in the witches' coven of cardinals. They say, it's the College of Cardinals. It's the coven of cardinals. You can say, without being crazy or far-fetched, in my book, that the coven of cardinals, the coven of crows. Cardinal is a bird, by the way. They cardinals. No. I don't want to call them cardinals. They're crows. All right? These are crows. In the coven of crows, it is a rite of passage to cover up for a pedophile. Because they've all done it. Francis did it with McCarrick. Benedict did it with the Father Lawrence Murphy. And now Mr. Prevost, that's Father, let's Pope Leo the Fourth to you. No, it's Mr. Prevost. Marcial Maciel. Remember Marcial Maciel? Remember this guy? Mexican guy? He was a serial child molester. And John Paul II gave him a position of power. This dude, he was a cult leader, this guy. He had his own cult. He had an order. He had his own order in Mexico. And what was oh man. He had an order. What was the name of the order? Catholic Order Legionnaires of Christ. All right, this was his order. It was a right-wing order, by the way. Did you know a right-winger is being a right-winger being a sodomite? Is that supposed to be shocking? Oh, he's not. Only wokies are perverts. No, righties can be perverts too. You do know that the people who crucified Jesus weren't liberals, right? They were conservative people of God. They were religious leaders who had conservative views. Marcial Maciel was a serial molester who led a right-wing Catholic order called the Legionnaires of Christ. Do you know who was working with the Legionnaires of Christ? Can you take a guess who was working with the Legionnaires of Christ? The Russians' favorite nemesis, the CIA. The CIA was working with the Legionnaires of Christ to fight against any sort of Soviet communist influence in the Vatican. John Paul II was a part of a Gladio operation to counter communist influence in the Vatican, because during the Cold War, the Vatican became one of the battlegrounds between the Soviet Union and the United States. And that's why during the Cold War, you had the Liberation Theology movement, which was a communist project. And then you had the counter to communism in the Vatican, which was being used as a proxy by the CIA during Operation Gladio. This is all facts. You can look this up. Fact check me if you want. It's all real. So John Paul II appointed Marcial Maciel because he was leading the Legionnaires of Christ, and he wanted to use the Legionnaires of Christ against communist influence. If you listen to the interviews of people who were members of Legionnaires of Christ when they were younger, you will see these men talking about how Marcial Maciel used to molest them. It's pretty demonic stuff. So the Grope Cope of Rome, Mr. Prevost, he covered up for a pedophile by the name of Father James Ray. Now, this reminds me of something that I read about taking place in my own diocese. In the Diocese of San Antonio, there was a priest that I met, by the way. I spoke to him, and I used to go to his church. I went to his church for months, and I went to many a mass in this man's church. This priest's name was Father Christopher Phillips. This is how common this evil is. Father Christopher Phillips was covering up for a confirmed pedophile by the name of Deacon Orr. I think his first name was James, but I remember his last name was Orr. Deacon Orr is how he was known. Deacon Orr molested a boy in a pool, in a bathroom, in a pool. It's really horrific, very horrific. I hate to even describe it, but that's what this guy did. It's so sickening and evil. And Orr was a teacher at Father Christopher Phillips's Catholic school. So Phillips was running a Catholic school, a private Catholic school. Father Christopher Phillips was running the school. Deacon Orr was appointed to teach history, although I'm not sure how educated he was, but he was appointed to teach history in this school. Well, it turned out that the young boys who were students in this school would avoid him. And if they knew that Deacon Orr was teaching a specific class, they would avoid that class. And the boy students, the male students, were telling the adults that Deacon Orr was a problem. Several parents came forward and went to Father Christopher Phillips to tell him that Deacon Orr was a predator. And for years this was going on, and Phillips didn't give a damn, never went to the police, never went to the authorities, never did a damn thing about it. Well, all of this got released to the public, and Deacon Orr all of a sudden mysteriously died. They never gave the cause of death, but they had a funeral for him, and they moved Father Christopher Phillips to Houston, to the Houston diocese. Then I believe they stripped him of his faculties. But Phillips covering up for this Deacon Orr guy, this was going on not just for years, my friends. This was going on for decades. For decades, this was going on. So this is very common, and it's so common that you can talk to so many people who go to Catholic parishes, and they will tell you stories like this. And it's so common that even I myself, in my own private life, went to a church where this sort of thing was going on. So Mr. Prevost was doing the same thing.